We'll call the meeting to order. This City of Fargo Commission is brought into session and discussion with legislative update meeting. Commissioners Preston and Garrick are present. Do we have anybody online? No? Okay, then we'll go ahead. Bruce Grubb is to start us out, and Mike Redinger is going to help us as well.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. As we discussed on Monday night, we wanted to consider weekly legislative update meetings to try and avoid the 2-week gap that occurs between regularly scheduled commission meetings. And so the problem that we were kind of up against is the hearing schedule for next week, for example, came out this morning, Friday morning. So noon on Friday, it doesn't always work, but it allows us to get the hearing list and have this discussion before the hearings are actually conducted next week. So today we'll be working from the master bill tracking list that I believe Mike sent out just a little bit ago and placed a hard copy in front of you. Last week, you were sent a couple of separate attachments Kember sent out, and those were my fault. I think they ended up causing more confusion than anything. They were kind of a quick reference guide for everybody to see a bill, a brief description, and which department it was assigned to. But the question naturally was, so what bill are we working from? So today, we're working from one list, and that's the list, and that's the master bill tracking list. So Mike has done a very nice job of coordinating the creation and maintenance of the master bill tracking list. And so I'd like to ask for Mike's help here to talk a little bit about the master list, as well as from that master list, he's able to extract those items that will be heard in committee next week. And so that's where most of our focus will be today. So Michael, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for the time today. I'll be brief in my comments just to provide a preview of the week to come. February 1 through 5, 2021 is going to be our first week in February, full week in February, where there's going to be several committee hearings of interest and importance to the city of Fargo. What I have up on the screen and what the commissioners who are present in the chambers have in front of them is a list of the hearing schedule that is organized topically and sorted by those bills that we are tracking. So in the city of Fargo today, we are tracking approximately 160 different bills. These are bills from everywhere from the House Agriculture Committee to the Senate Tax Committee. So any kind of committee that you can think about where we might have a bill of interest or importance to us, we are tracking, and we are going to be actively monitoring throughout the 67th Legislative Assembly. Bruce did a great job earlier this year and in the last couple of weeks scrubbing all bills that have been submitted so far at the legislature. We have now gotten past those dates by which all bills must be submitted in both the House and in the Senate. So we know what our universe looks like. And so from that universe, we need to figure out then where we are at in the House, where we're at in the Senate, and this bill tracking list and our hearing schedule work together to help keep us on top of our tasks and what we're doing. So again, about 160 tracked bills in total. Right now in the city of Fargo, 23 of those bills are going to be heard in one form or another next week and get hearings. So this is going to be a full week, no holidays. So now we're after the MLK Junior holiday and before President's Day. We've got a couple of solid weeks here of a 5-day-a-week legislative business. So what I have here again is just a track sheet to show you where we're at and what we're doing. Again, just to explain, and as we did earlier in the legislative session, we've added both a description column and a comment section in each of these bills, so you can see what the commentary has been provided by the individual department or entity, in this case, the city attorney's office, the finance department, the assessor's office, for example. The way you read the committee hearing sheet is over here on the far left in this column, the date and time. This will show you the date. This is Monday, February 1. We are up right away at 9 o'clock in the morning with a bill that the city attorney is recommending that the city of Fargo oppose. And then again, that just ascends throughout the week. And so you'll see the bills listed by day, Tuesday, February 2, et cetera. So you're going to see that a lot of the bills next week, I was doing a very brief skim. A lot of them are related to finance, related to legal issues. And then there's a few health department related bills in there as well. And so what do we do when we're monitoring these activities? Let me flip over to our complete master tracking list. In our 160 bills, what are we doing? We are primarily monitoring many of these bills. Where we have recommended that staff and the organization take a position, we have noted as such, but you'll see in the vast majority of cases, I'll say 80 to 85% of the cases, we are simply recommending that we monitor something to see what happens at crossover break. Perhaps it's a bill that doesn't survive the House. We don't have to worry about it after that because it's not going to make it over to the Senate. But if it is a bill that does in fact cross over, we make it in the Senate, or we have a bill that still is alive in the House, this helps us see where we think our activity is going to take us here after the crossover break. And just a note on that, that comes up here in less than a month's time. On February 26th, that is going to be our crossover date this year. And then the legislature is going to take a break on March 1 and March 2. So that just gives you a sense of the kind of game board and where they're going to be at. So I won't go into great detail on the track list, but one other explanation I would give here is that much like the hearing schedule that ascends chronologically from the oldest date to the newest date, this also ascends from the lowest number of bill submissions, so in the House, bill number 1010, and then it's going to go all the way up to those Senate bills into the 2000 series. So you're going to be able to see exactly what has occurred to date. This is a PDF snapshot in time taken here just in the last hour. So you'll see that some of these bills have already passed the House. These will cross over. These are alive. And then you will see where we have other bills, just by way of example, that are still awaiting a hearing. So they have not had full floor votes, and they will in fact be heard on the House side, or be heard on the House side, and then their fate will be determined at that point. So I'll just leave it at that. I just want to thank our staff. They provided a really great job here and have done a nice amount of work providing background and detail about what they're thinking, about what they're tracking. And we do have several of those staff members not only here present today, but also on the Pexip Bridge, that if there are questions, we can certainly follow up on any of those bills that you see. Maybe it's something of interest. But I would just make the last comment that I think that you will see in many of these comments there is a strategic engagement. We don't engage on every bill. We don't oppose every bill or support every bill. There's a lot of monitoring simply because we want to be strategic and really invest our time and really the organization's time where we think it can add the most value for the city of Fargo and for our residents. So I'll leave it at that for today, and we're happy to answer any questions as well as our subject matter experts that are gathered here. Thank you.
Bruce, back to you, or are we going to just go through this?
Well, I'd just like to follow up of the bills scheduled for hearing. There's only one where we're proposing to submit testimony next week, and that's in support of an SRF loan bill that's very important to the diversion project. But other than that, we do have monitors support, oppose in some cases bills, but only planning or proposing testimony on one. And that bill is House Bill 1431.
And for those on the Pexip Bridge, that is up on your screen as well, 1431 with some notes about the Bank of North Dakota and about planned diversion authority and city testimony.
So the one thing I saw that was Red River Valley Water Supplies wanted a loan at 2%. This one goes up to 5% over time, so that would not be as helpful to our users. Do we put in testimony to say that could be a concern?
Garrison Diversion is involved with that since they'll be the project owner and we're a recipient of water and a big player in that, but Garrison Diversion is out in Bismarck doing that right now, yes.
So they would put testimony to oppose,
Yes.
we would monitor on the side?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have any one of these that you want to make comments on or concerns about?
The first, Mayor, I think we should affirm as a commission who would support sending the testimony for that. So it was my hope that any one of these that staff thought we should put testimony to, we would all up here say we agree or disagree with sending that testimony.
So we're putting testimony in the first one. Are you okay with that?
Well, the 1431, I would support the staff's recommendation on that.
Yeah. The House Bill 1386, any issues with that? Because our city attorney did put in testimony on that.
Is that true? Did we put testimony at 1381 or 1386?
No, there is no testimony in 1386.
Just opposed it?
Correct. That's just a note from the city attorney that we would be in
Well,
opposition.
from our point of view, but Eric doesn't put any document saying you oppose?
What we can show here, and I can load up for the commission, is the written pieces that have been submitted to date. In some cases, where some of these bills have been heard, there have been some written pieces. I believe we have about a dozen, but we can put that up on the screen. And we're also going to make that link available for the commissioners as well, so that you can see what has been written and prepared previously before this meeting on Friday.
So Eric, on this it says comment and said you opposed. Have you put anything anywhere, or would you be putting something in there? Because when we had the pandemic, we had to shut some businesses down. We did it with state authorization, but.
Yeah, I haven't, I haven't put in any testimony, and if I were, I would make a notation in all caps, testimony.
Okay.
So that's how you know what the distinction is if we're going to submit written testimony. Otherwise, at least at this stage, I haven't made that decision on what to testify going forward. But at this stage, I've only submitted testimony on one bill that related to the free speech.
Well, I mean, we had bar and restaurants shut down, so in the bill sponsor is saying that, if I understand what you're saying, is that he's trying to pull that out of there.
Right.
So in light of what we did in the pandemic, we had businesses shutting down. Early on in the pandemic, we shut businesses down. We would have to oppose it, I would assume,
Yep.
with some testimony, because otherwise there's no impact to our community.
Right. Yes, and it certainly can put testimony in. Again, we're still making those determinations, but in this particular case, certainly can, yes.
But just for the commissioners, typically the governor might put out a shutdown on the bars and restaurants, and typically locally, you adopt those, and you can only be more restrictive. You can't be more liberal. So if he says 50, we can't say 75. And although Grand Forks, when they did that, and it was at 25%, they did say 50. So far what's happened, typically when the governor puts an emergency order out, we have mirrored that. If we wanted to be more restrictive, you're allowed to do that. So to me, is if the bill goes through, you would have no control of the bars, restaurants, or any businesses.
I support not giving testimony on this because I think the point of the whole thing is to allow those subdivisions to decide what that restriction would be. The last sentence in that description area. So if the governor puts a mandate that says we need to be at 50%, we'll decide as a subdivision if we want to do 50, 25, 75, whatever we want to do. So I understand the city attorney opposes it. I would support not making it public or sending the testimony out there. For that reason, more local control.
So Eric, if I understand it, it says they wouldn't have to listen to the governor, though. Isn't that what that's saying when it says any business from a statewide emergency declaration?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps the question is, how do we decide, or how is the decision made about whether we actually provide testimony or not? How is that decision being made? Is it a staff level decision, or?
That's the point of all this, right? That's why we're here. So if the mayor is putting forward that he wants to have testimony there, we should everyone here needs to say, yes, I agree. Or
Okay, so nobody testifies unless we approve it? Is that what we're saying?
That's correct.
Not necessarily so. So sometimes what happens is for instance, Eric had a motion on the court system where you could change it over to civil court.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain that one?
Sure, there's a bill that proposes to take criminal judgments and be able to use the civil process for collection. That, yeah, I put in there a favorable response.
So that's not necessarily anything that have to do with us, but it has to do with his workings, and it works. So sometimes department heads will do that. We have drain field issue that's coming up. So typically engineers sometimes would testify on that because on that drain field issue, we'd constantly have to do assessments for that. And presently it's managed in a different way so people don't get assessment for this, assessment for that, and assessment for that.
And let me clarify, I'm not arguing that that is actually the way we do it, because there will be changes that are happening real quickly.
Yep.
And we can't rely on us up here to be the decision maker on whether there's some action that gets taken, or testimony, not action, but testimony.
And then Kent frequently gets bills on finance, which would affect us and what's in testimony, but it's nothing that we personally as commissioners necessarily would know affects us in any way.
Maybe if I could add one more statement here.
Sure.
You know, it seems to me that it's important for the body up here to provide some overriding kind of guidance,
Okay.
but that we don't get into the weeds. And with that overriding guidance, you should be able to interpret perhaps where we stand if changes are coming about.
Excellent idea, Mayor. If I might, the question that Commissioner Preston asked in past sessions and prior to becoming city administrator as the enterprise director, for example, I was assigned bills to read through, and based on policies, practices, how we operate, would recommend a position that the city administrator was made aware of, as well as my liaison commissioner. But you're right, sometimes to wait for all five to get together is really difficult. And then each Friday, when we send out this updated list, at a minimum, the five commissioners would be able to see what the position is.
Well, I'm irritated by this whole conversation. Why am I here then? We're having these Friday meetings to give an up and down,
Overriding guidance.
not overriding guidance. We have specific bills in front of us, one of which we are saying we're going to send testimony to. Now we're saying we're going to send two, based on someone's opinion. Well, we are the decision makers. We need to get into the weeds. We're talking about bills that affect our residences directly. So I'm not going to have some unelected bureaucrat be my mouthpiece when I'm telling them that I oppose it. Now, if the majority here thinks that we should send testimony, if Tim thinks we should send testimony on 1386, he should ask the rest of the commission to support that, and then majority rules. If Tim thinks it's a good idea, but four of us don't, and he sends out Eric to be in opposition of this publicly, well, now he's a dictator. So no, the whole reason that I asked for this to be put together was so that we would have an up or down vote on all of these things, so that we're not being misrepresented in Bismarck. Because in the past, in my opinion, we have been, or at least I have been. We've said the city commission agrees on this. Well, we never had a vote on that. And who's to say that we did agree on that? Well, that's why we're here. So we need to get into the weeds. We're looking at this whole list here. It's not an overbearing amount of bills. It's very few. So if you want us in testimony, make the motion. We'll have an up or down vote, and we'll go from there. If you're right, then you're right. If you're wrong, you're wrong, and he's not going to give testimony then.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just, Tony, my concern is that we are strapping the staff back so that they cannot respond on a timely basis to something that we may not be able to address in between. I'm fine with going through this list and saying, yes, we support this one, no, we don't. But, you know, just so that we're not sending the message that because we support this one the way it's written currently, if there are major changes to that bill and we're not in place to be able to respond to it quickly enough, that they can't. I don't want to send that message at all.
We are very available people. We have cell phones, we have emails, we have Zoom, we have these meetings on Fridays, we have meetings every other Monday. I can't imagine a better time in history.
Well,
That exact day.
here, we've got three people,
Yeah.
just barely a quorum.
Yes, it's a
Could
quorum.
very easily be on a quick turnaround time that we couldn't get a quorum.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, there's no testimonies given because support wasn't given for it.
So on one, Eric, I agree with your oppose, but I think sometimes what we get in trouble with is this is really a legislative issue with the executive branch. And just as we don't like the legislative team to get into local control, I will let them ferret that out, and I would not necessarily ask you to do any testimony. And Tony opposes, and that's fine. So I will not ask you to give testimony on that particular one, so. The next ones, any commissioners, any one of the next bills who want anything said about? Gaming revenue is interesting to me, that would bring more gaming into us. Can I ask on the assessor's office, what is the church wanting? No taxes on church property versus a church? Do we know? Kent, do you know?
Mike Sponskowski is.
Yeah, I'm here. So as I'm looking, this is 1471. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Bill 1471. From what I've been able to look at in the language, basically all it is doing is just removing a lot of language that doesn't it doesn't seem to change the bill all that much. It's basically a lot of detail about what is already covered in the bill itself. That's what I know about it right now. I did have a call from the Grand Forks assessor about this, and he it was right before this meeting, so I haven't been able to talk to him about it. But I guess somebody said that the League of Cities had some kind of problem with this, but again, I haven't heard what that is. But as far as what I can tell from it, it basically just kind of cleans up the language, and I'm not seeing a huge change in what's being done with this. It doesn't seem to affect us all that much.
Commissioner Preston, any issues about cigar bars? Do you like cigar bars or no?
Yeah, I go to them regularly. Monitoring sounds good to me.
Okay. But the health department would probably oppose that, right?
Oh, oppose. I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
looking at the wrong one.
Yep.
Yeah, oppose. That would be great.
Are you asking for testimony?
You know, I guess, yeah, it would be good, probably, to provide some testimony there. But again, you know what? I leave it up to, I guess, Tony, in regards to your comment earlier, the staff, yes, they're part of a bureaucracy, but they have the expertise as well. And I rely on that expertise. So if the staff feel like it's important to be testifying at this level, I think that's fine. If it gets to the Senate, then I would say definitely testify.
Commissioners, if we could clarify, just again, back on the matrix, where testimony is not noted, staff is not requesting testimony. Obviously, it's a commission directive. If the commission would like to see staff testimony or organizational testimony on an item, but where, as was noted earlier, where we look at this hearing schedule, we only had the one matter where anything was proposed to proactively do something with it. Where it's noted as oppose, it would simply be a monitoring activity. But again, it would be the commission's prerogative to, if it did wish to
Right.
direct.
That's what I was assuming from this.
Correct.
So first page, Commissioner Preston, Commissioner Goering, anything you want pulled out or talked about?
No, I think monitoring is fine for those.
Okay, now we're going to go to the second page. There's only 2 bills on the second page. And any issues there?
No, not from me.
Charlotte? No. Third page we'll go to, we have finance opposing legacy fund transfers on property tax. Kent?
So this one you don't plan on testifying, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, in this case, I hadn't listed whether testimony is appropriate or not. But, I mean, the gist of this is that it appears as though they're going to take legacy fund money and totally nuke property taxes. While that might be really great for our citizens, it takes out our most stable revenue source. And
So which Nashville League of Cities opposed? Wouldn't the League of Cities oppose this or not, Ken?
Well, we haven't talked about it. It'll
Okay.
probably come up on today's call, but I mean, I mean, you look at what has happened over the past sessions with legislative initiatives to lower property taxes, and they're not sustainable, and oftentimes they just suddenly go away. So I think the reason why I listed it as being opposed is some of our bonds are backed by property taxes. Our full faith and credit when we issue certain types of bonds is also backed by property taxes. So if you take away that pledge, that's a golden pledge to the bondholders. And if you take that away, obviously our interest rates will be higher. And we're going to continue to issue a lot of debt in a growing community. So we don't believe that removing property taxes is in our best interest.
So does the bill also decrease the cap on the mill levy like they did for the school district?
No, I don't know that. I haven't been
I would bet that would happen.
that deep into the bill, but I was trying to make reference to what's happened in the past. And I mean, even just most recently, look at Prairie Dog. Prairie Dog didn't even get out of the chutes, and it's already a dead issue. So, I mean, we really wouldn't want to go down that path. May not be a dead issue, but it's certainly stalled out.
Oil might go up, Ken. Have some hope, huh?
I do.
So on this page, commissioners, you want to pull either one? Anything on there?
I'm good.
I know Mike's got one on property values and such, but we oppose. Then page 4, any issues on that?
Can I just ask a question about PERS? Is it actually, does it not have sufficient reserves or something? What's going on there?
There have been many recent initiatives over the last legislative sessions to try to improve the funding status of the ND PERS program. I don't know the exact figure, but I think it's somewhere that their funded status is in the high 70s,
Okay.
which means they have, 70% of the money that they need to be financially stable. So there's been a variety of things, variety of ways to approach it, but this particular bill, 1342, is probably the most willing to support because they're taking a slow approach by raising the contribution levels somewhat systematically. There's another bill that came out of the Senate that may be on this list later, I think it's 2042, immediately raising it by 5.12% next year. I mean, that's 5% of all of our employee base. That's a budget killer. So we certainly wouldn't want to support that, but the state has, I don't know how to say this, but it appears they haven't been very proactive in trying to bolster the financial status of ND PERS.
Well, but Ken, I think we'd have to comment because the city of Fargo did this one time 5-6 years ago as we looked at our pension and our funding. And then we turned to all our employees and said, you got to put another % in, and we got to put a % in to try to get to a ratio that was higher than 70%, which I think we are now. And we had a plan that would get us better vested in the pension fund over a 10-year period, right? I mean, City of Fargo looked at that, and we felt we needed to put more into it. So doesn't this help fix any PERS?
It helps fix it, but it's not as robust of a strategy as we used.
Well, they have to put some money in it too, and we've had to put some money in it too. So that's where you'd say, hey, they maybe look at that with legacy funds.
Yeah, well, we're saying support in this case because at least they're moving in the right direction. The other bill is too draconian. In our opinion, it's too much money immediately. There's one other bill that hasn't surfaced on the hearing list yet, and that says, Mr. Mayor, just exactly what you described. It's requiring you to fund what is the actuarial requirement, so that 30% shortage on their funding status literally needs to be amortized like a mortgage. So you have to pay what the normal cost is, plus all the baggage that you've inherited over the years. So that one is a bit tenuous too, because there's a lot of volatility in the stock market and their investments are tied directly to equities. And so we're fearful of that one because that one creates a lot of volatility. So of the three ND PERS bills that are out there, this one, it seems to be the one that people are interested in supporting.
Now, the other thing, Arlette Preston, I'm assuming the Bill 2139, that is something that you and Planning Department are for? It's offering Renaissance zone in the neighborhood, is that correct?
Actually, I have some major concerns, well, not concerns, questions about this one, and I've talked to Jim a few times, and actually Nicole too. The thing that concerns me about this one is it certainly may address some of the rehab and incentivize rehab of inner core neighborhoods, homes, single-family homes. But the application of it is going to be quite narrow. What worries me more, and Jim and I are not in agreement on this, what worries me more is that it will probably, because it's available not only for single family, but for multifamily and or commercial, that single family homes may be very well raised and large multifamily or commercial could replace. So it's not targeted well enough. There is a fund, a neighborhood zone fund that could be established, but as we were talking, I don't see or hear the incentive for single families or for families to actually use that fund. There's no advantage for them to be able to access that fund. So again, it just, the whole thing, it feels like they're trying to, well, and basically what the sponsors have done is take the Renaissance zone legislation and stick in a neighborhood zone. It just feels like a round peg in a square hole, or the other way around, square peg in a round hole.
Nicole, does this mesh with the neighborhood plan study? I thought this was put forth because on your neighborhood study, they wanted something like this.
Yeah, I think you'll see in the chart, I believe I put planning supports it, but we're not planning on providing any testimony unless directed as such. We are more following it. I think Commissioner Preston's concerns are certainly true. I think the intention of how Fargo could use it in benefiting some elements, the control would be at the local level.
So you have a pizza place up north by the Shack, been sitting there for a long time. Would this qualify? Could they come in commercial and take it down and do something else and we get a Renaissance zone?
Potentially, we would have to craft the rules and the operational plan, submit that to the state on how our intention of using the neighborhood zones would be happening. So there's a lot of
So planning
steps.
department, our team could modify this bill if it goes through to meet more of our specific needs.
We
on
could set
single-
our rules at the local level as long as they meet the legislative parameters.
And my concern there would be, and we've got a history of doing this, the developers know that it's available for a different purpose, and we would get lots of pressure. And in fact, we have not had a good history of resisting that.
And I had the same concerns that you did, because my first thought was, how is this different than the 5-year incentive that we give for older homes to do remodeling, right? How is it different other than it can be for commercial?
And to be honest with you, the core neighborhood plan does call for more rehab funding, but this is not going to be accessible to the individuals that are elderly or their income level is such that they have to actually go out and borrow the money to rehab the home. It's a mixed bag for those that are currently residing in a home, and if we truly want them to rehab or rehabilitate their home, it may not get us there at all.
But wouldn't, if you tore down your house and built a new single-family house, wouldn't you not pay property tax for 5 years and income tax for 5 years? Wouldn't that be helpful?
With this? No,
This-
right? I mean, you'd be exempt.
No, I think you could, if we take on the same rules of the Renaissance zone.
So you could tear down a house, rebuild a house, let's say it's a $200,000 house. different from the rehab funding. We just don't tax the increased value for 5 years. On this one, if I built a $200,000 house, I would not be taxed on that for 5 years, and I also would not have income tax for 5 years.
Right.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Right,
Okay.
right. Sorry, I misunderstood your question.
And we can
But
set
again-
that rule.
Excuse me?
We can set that rule locally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
But again, the issue is the individual that's probably having a difficult time financing a rehab, income tax exemption is not going to be of any value to them, probably. So,
Well, I think to you, it brings that point of, okay, single-family home, somebody comes in and puts in a twin home or something like that. Is that what you want to incentivize? Or on the neighborhood study, is that what we want? Or, you know, you have big single-family homes, you're going to break them down and make them a smaller home that would have a nuclear family or something. Would that incentivize that? And I guess that's a question we would have.
well, and it probably takes a little more conversation too, and that's why it would be good to just monitor at this point.
Yeah, I think that staff's recommendation is to stay neutral. I mean, we support it in the idea of investing in our neighborhoods, our core neighborhoods. And
Could your team just discuss it a little bit with Gilmore and everybody, and then just like a white paper of here's what we think it could do that would be helpful, and here's the negative on it, just internally for the commissioners?
Sure.
And
you do
or any language that might help clarify the target.
Yeah, I think we're out of luck on the language, or in terms of, I don't know if I could bring any intellect to that discussion quite
Okay,
readily, but I can certainly talk to the pros and cons of what I read so far.
okay.
Or more specifically, what would be good here locally? Like, how can we use it in a positive way?
Sure.
And then what is the negatives, like, what was the unintended consequences of it here locally in Fargo? If we
Sure.
have control over that, then I really don't care what Bismarck does, you know what I mean? But here locally,
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely.
thanks.
And just as a question to the two commissioners, Bill 1165, which says we'd have extraterritorial electors to vote in city election, are you for or against?
No.
I see two shaking heads. We'd oppose that, but not necessarily.
Where did that one come from?
Would we put testimony in on that, or would we just oppose?
This one, I think, needs some testimony, probably. I think
Steve-
it's crazy.
Steve Sprague is on the line. Steve, would you like to comment on that, please?
Well, it came to mind for me as representation without taxation. Like allowing people to vote on city matters when they're not citizens of the city of Fargo. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
No.
So can we put testimony in, Steve? Because we strongly would oppose, can you and Eric draft something? Is that the reasonable response to that?
Sure, I think we can work something out.
Is there something we're missing on this? Because it really seems weird. It really seems nonsensical. But is there something that we're missing?
Bruce, Mike, is there anything we're missing on that particular aspect, or is it some particular extraterritorial that puts
In my
it in?
opinion, I don't think we are. We've seen this, I've been here 30 years. I've seen this many, many times in other sessions.
Oh, okay.
I'd be good with testimony then.
So it's probably not going to go anywhere.
Typically doesn't, but they always like to think if you don't oppose it, then you're not, maybe you don't oppose it.
Yeah, I think this certainly rises to the level, and I'm willing to guess we can find previous testimony to stay consistent as well.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Any other items on page 4 for us today? If not, we'll go to page 5.
So 1457, there's no testimony planned, or? I would certainly support the opposition of it.
So Eric, I'm under the impression that typically an emergency, unless it's designated, oftentimes it is revisited every 30 days? Or is there something different that this does, or the commission oftentimes within 30 days puts in a motion to continue or go on?
And I'm
So-
sorry, just catching up, you're referring to 1323?
1457, which says they meet every 15 days.
Yeah, so the current law, this is the state law, of course, obviously, we're in the state legislature, but state law provisions regarding local states of emergency. That law says the mayor has the authority to declare a state of emergency, but it has to be approved by, in this case, city commission within 7 days. And that's all the law says. So it just needs input within 7 days in order for it to last, and certainly can be extended for an indefinite period. This law would then limit the city commission's authority to extend it beyond 15 days. Basically, it'd have to be every 15 days at least. City commission would have to weigh in on whether or not to continue extending it. You would be not empowered under this statute to extend it for 30 days or 60 days even, unless you invoke some kind of home rule power. But under this state law anyways, that would be the case.
Comments?
I would support opposing it and think it's probably important enough to provide some kind of testimony.
Yeah, just to provide context, I mean, the example we encounter, of course, is with flooding, where we get a forecast shortly after the new year that there's a likelihood of flood. It's important for procurement purposes to and get reimbursement authorized by FEMA if it ends up being qualifying for FEMA declaration, that there be a city, a local state of emergency in effect before you start commencing procurement to prepare for flood. So that's one example where you're, not very many emergencies happen where you've got a 3-month lead time, but that's one of them where you do. And the other issue, of course, is you have a lot of emergencies that have recovery, both physical recovery after a flood or after a fire or an anhydrous ammonia spill or whatever the emergency is, or a pandemic, including reimbursement recovery that lasts longer than that. And so the question you worry about, and we're in the middle of diving into this issue, but the question you just worry about is whether that has to be done with a state of emergency in all respects. And I think the answer is going to end up being there's just a risk that it won't if you don't have a state of emergency that's continuous, that starts at the appropriate time and extends till the appropriate end date.
I think Commissioner Garrick's reviewing some of that data, emergency of flood versus disaster versus riot versus COVID. I like it that the commission needs to know in 7 days. They have the right at that point to say, we'll extend it for 15 days, 30 days, 100 days, whatever. But I still think that gives the commissioners local. I think we've learned a little bit on this COVID of how things happen. We may want to modify going forward. This 15 days, I'm not sure I like it. It just, I'd rather let us figure it out. Tony, we're going to look at some of that ordinance and what can we do. We may have a better way of doing it, so I'd rather not have the state tell us how to do it. I'd rather have us figure it out.
And I agree with you. I think this should be a local control issue. I don't think we should step into this one. So I would be opposed to sending testimony. I'm fine with the stance that's written down here, but I think we can figure it out here locally better. But I don't think it's really our place to go.
So we can oppose but not put in testimony.
That's my suggestion.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just say, though, there are a lot of bills that are impacting local control. This is one of them.
Yeah.
And it's real irritating. That's why I'm thinking it's important enough to probably register our opposition. However, I'm okay with waiting until it gets to the Senate side too. That's fine.
En masse, the same thing, the next one. You're okay with that as well?
Okay, yeah.
That's okay. 2 other bills. Any comments? You want to do this?
Monitor's fine with me.
Okay. Commissioner Preston, you had some issues of 2 bills, which the police chief, I think, is on. And we kind of wanted to have some discussion on that. He did ask for testimony on the one with dealer versus Good Samaritan. And I think, Chief, you amended that, so we're trying to make sure we don't lose the Good Samaritan, but we deal with the dealer. Can you just comment to that for our commissioner? And then I think she wants to ask you some questions on the bill.
Sure. Yeah, the enhanced penalty for the drug trafficker. There was a revision that was crafted by our state's attorney's office, who were involved in the initial harm reduction, or the Good Samaritan immunity language that went in a couple sessions ago. So Everyone on this bill supports maintaining that immunity piece, but there was some language in there that created confusion, and so that language that was crafted by the same attorney involved was meant to help clarify that. So that was offered by Representative Koppelman as a revision to the Judiciary Committee prior to testimony on Wednesday. My testimony, and I think you have a written copy as well on the website, also hinges support upon the revision as submitted, so that there's no question about the that language survives, and that the enhanced penalty for the dealer who is not the addict-to-addict sharer person remains. And we're seeing not only a rise in overdoses, but fatalities. We've seen an influx of some pretty insidious things that are being done by not users and sharers, but drug traffickers who are just really criminals and involved in criminal enterprise, to the extent where we have pills being distributed. They're so sophisticated that they actually put stamps on the pills, so the unsuspecting addict might think this is actually even a legitimate pharmaceutical that they're taking, when in fact it contains fentanyl. And so through our investigations, in some instances, we're able to identify these traffickers and dealers. And then with the passage of this bill, they would be submitted to a Class A felony, just like any other crime, like an armed robbery where you kill someone in the course of the crime, felony murder, that type of thing. So that was the focus of the bill, the focus of the testimony and support. So we, I think, have fair support, I guess, after the testimony to the House Judiciary. So I don't think they've taken it up for a vote or anything as of yet.
Any questions on that, Bill?
So, Chief, the changes that were made and submitted, you're saying the bill was amended already? And
Yes.
those are the amendments that were, I lost track of the emails going back and forth about the changes that were being talked about between you and the Health Department and John Strand?
Right. So the revision that was made by Kimberly Edgevik, I think
Yeah.
it is, right?
Yeah.
Those revisions were offered by Representative Koppelman as revision number 2, and he submitted that to the Judiciary Committee. And so in my testimony, I supported the bill with those revisions as well. So there was no question about that. And I think in some after conversations with some of the legislators, there was support for the enhanced penalty. And I think if it gets mucky about the sharing language, which really Kimberly was trying to clarify to help as well, that they might likely split the bill and just add the penalty enhancer and leave the existing language. So that would be the other outcome. But either way, the immunity clause would remain.
Okay, all right, sounds good.
Now we'll switch to the bail issue. Do you want to ask questions or?
About the bias crime, or about what?
The bail bond issue, or
Bail
the
bond.
issue about bails, and I think Chief has at least been offered some testimony in that regards, and then it's kind of a question. So did you have specific questions, or do you want to hear what he's thinking, or?
Actually, the chief and I are going to have a meeting on Monday, I believe, so we can talk about that one, I think,
Okay.
there, as well
Do
as.
you have any questions about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a discussion to have. The bonding issue is a complicated one, and we've had a lot of discussion here locally about it. Are we targeting poor people versus people of means? You know, if you have the exact same crime, or at least the same category, and you can afford to bond yourself out, the penalty is far less than if you can't. And you have to spend 3 weeks in a jail for a Class B misdemeanor. You know what I mean?
Yep. And just for your benefit, commissioners, you might not have seen this. It was probably been an hour and a half since I submitted, but I sent you all an email with a bunch of evidence-based research and some other information to, I guess, better inform future discussions on that. So I wholeheartedly support bail reform, but this bill is not bail reform. It's actually in contrast with the evidence-based research. That's why I have a public safety concern about it. So we've offered our assistance and cooperation, not just myself, but other area chiefs and the sheriff, to work with legislators to see if we can actually get some traction moving in that direction. We haven't really had much of a response at this point.
I also believe Representative Hansen, who was involved in getting the pilot program going, that's currently just getting implemented, as I understand, She is also working, I think, with a sponsor to identify some amendments. So, I guess I would just say that this is an opportunity to try chip away on bail reform if we can. And if there's some language that would be better to use, let's do that, it seems to me.
Can I ask a question about that? Just because I don't know. Does it have to be a state issue, or can we do things like that locally? Can we do some things for bail reform locally that would be in conflict with state law?
Sure. One of the things that we discussed with Representative Rose Hansen was there is a variance in bail and bond schedules across the state of North Dakota between counties and cities. And so, one at least starting point might be to make that standard across the board. So I think that was one of the considerations. The other piece, and really the crux of the issue with the bill, is that it's mischaracterizing crimes versus people, and not all misdemeanor crimes are committed by low-risk people, because I think we would all agree no one wants someone to sit in jail merely because, and they're going to come to court and they're not a safety risk and that kind of stuff, but because they don't have any means to pay to get out of jail. But the whole research, and this doesn't have to be a reinvention of the wheel, this is all out there, and it's current data and information done in other states. We did it in Wisconsin. Is about evaluating the risk level of the person. You can't do that by crime category. So as an example, a high risk person, meaning they are likely not to appear in court, they haven't appeared previously, or they are otherwise a threat to the community or an individual, could commit a misdemeanor crime. And the way the bill is written, they would walk out the door without a second question. And so that's the issue that from a public safety perspective we have. I mean, we're in total agreement, and the local chiefs, and I think even the business community that we spoke with, that done properly, we be more than willing and interested in working on that. I don't know if you can fix that in this bill at that time, but maybe approaching the bail thing across the board might be one step in the right direction, and then maybe we form a criminal justice coordinating council to work on these other issues.
If I can just add something to that. However, I think that there's also high-risk individuals that can afford the bail. So it's the actual cash that doesn't necessarily define whether a person's high risk or not.
Right. No, you're right. And so actually in the research commissioner, a high-risk person doesn't get any bail. They sit until trial. And that's the other end of the coin, because
Currently, right now, they don't, right?
No, they don't. No, you're absolutely right.
No,
so
they
I
don't.
agree with you on that, but the bill doesn't contemplate that aspect at all. It's just letting everyone who commits a certain crime out, and that's the issue.
Right, exactly. So if we can fix some of those things.
Good discussion. Okay, Bruce and Mike, you're at the podium, so I assume you want to say something.
Well,
Your answer to life is what?
No, I wanted to jump ahead to next week. Really enjoyed the noon meeting. Thank you for making yourself available. Next Friday at noon, however, always scheduling conflicts, and we're conflicted with the Lake Agassiz Water Authority board meeting and Board of Health meeting. So just chatted with Kember about that a little bit this morning. We could search for another time on Friday. The problem with Friday afternoons is we've got North Dakota legislative joint call-ins, a bunch of things happening Friday afternoon because the bill hearing list has come out. So we could either give an update at the normal commission meeting on Monday evening at 5 o'clock. We'll miss Monday's bill testimonies, but maybe when we send out our update on Friday, we could indicate on there where we would be proposing testimony or something to that effect. We could meet earlier in the day as well, but we do have a regular meeting at 5 o'clock.
So we're going to have these conflicts once in a while, and so we're trying to know that we know at least on the commission night we could do it, always if we had to. We can look, I know I talked to Tony, and Thursday and Friday you do have some liquidity, but we don't get the list till Thursday, so it makes it a little hard. So if we play with Fridays, it'll probably be our issues that we might play. And I think as we get more into this, we'll have more idea what we want to do. This was a good session, went 50 minutes, but I think we're all kind of know, I really want to hear about this. We really want to get into this. But I think, Mike, you've done a great job too, is that we can look at this and see what's going on as commissioners and kind of know what's happening. And one of the things as mayor, what I'd say is oftentimes look at the liaison commissioner on a certain bill when anybody who's testifying and ask them what's going on, because you also can influence that. You can come to me as a police liaison, Tony, and say, I don't like what's going on here. Same with Commissioner Preston is, and I want you to address these things with the chief, and then I can carry that message. So we wouldn't always have to meet as a group. But to Commissioner Gary's comment, sometimes we do need to have the opinion of the commission on certain bills so that we know where we stand as the city of Fargo. So we'll work with you on future meetings and try to keep that. But for next week, we will probably have a legislative discussion at the commission meeting. And at that meeting, we'll decide on the next time we will meet, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? I got all my department chiefs here and everything's okay.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second, Violet?
Second.
We're adjourned. Thank you.